Peoples of the worldwide federated internet, what's good? All right, returning to the book of Jonah, and I've been like, I'm not gonna say abnormally, but more excited than usual studying the book of Jonah because it's meshed two worlds in my mind. It's meshed my love for history and my love for the Bible. It's meshed both of these things, and my studies have collided, and it's been pretty good. It's been really good, actually. So I can't believe y'all let me do this. Y'all let me get all the way through all of this in the book of Jonah and not even go to the first mention of the city Nineveh in the Bible. Man, and that gives a whole nother backdrop to what was going on in the book of Jonah and the details that God has interwoven in the Bible. Man, this is pretty magnificent. I'm gonna deal with a few topics today, and let's get to the book of Jonah. Book of Jonah, chapter 1. And I think we left off at verse 9. I'm not sure if I'll get down there because, like I said, I want to get back to the first mention of the city of Nineveh in the Bible. Anyway, let's get into this. All right, so obviously, Nineveh mentioned in verse 2, the city that God sent Jonah to. But what is the first mention of Nineveh? And this is where things get even more interesting. So the first mention of Nineveh is actually in the book of Genesis, chapter 10. And there's quite an interesting character that's mentioned as the founder of the city of Nineveh. And this is like equally interesting. Okay, so what am I going to get to? All right, so let me go far up. These are actually I'm going to start at verse 1, right? It's dealing with Noah's sons. So verse 1 of Genesis chapter 10. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiraz, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Rephath, and Torgama, and his sons Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families in their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabbath, and Ramoth, and Sabachah. And the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begot Nimrod. So Nimrod is great-grandson of Noah. And of course, we know during this time, lifespans were much longer. So the Bible says that, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now remember that. Remember, Nimrod was a mighty hunter. Drill that down in your brain. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar, out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah. Now, a lot of places mentioned in the Bible, either the names are translated different, therefore we don't know what these cities were, or we haven't found some of these places like Nineveh, right? Before Nineveh was discovered, or let's just say rediscovered, a lot of people question whether it actually existed. They figured it was only mentioned in the Bible, and I think a couple other places, a couple other historical documents it was mentioned. So people at some point wondered, okay, so is this a fictitious city? You know, is it sort of like the lost city of Atlantis, which maybe Atlantis was an actual place? I'm not telling you it was or it wasn't. Here's where this gets so interesting. The Bible drops details and nuggets. Okay, so why is Nineveh mentioned? Nothing is mentioned on accident. You know what? I'm gonna do something that I didn't plan on doing here, and hopefully my Strong's Concordance doesn't go crazy today. I believe I looked up what Nineveh means when we were in the book of Jonah, but I might not have. So it means abode of Ninus. And of course, capital of the ancient kingdom of Assyria, located on the east bank of the Tigris River, 550 miles from its mouth and 250 miles north of Babylon. Okay, and what does Nimrod mean? That's another one. It's a really good one. Let me go back up. Okay, so Nimrod. Nimrod is loosely translated as the valiant or rebellion. And there's many scholarly arguments about why it could possibly mean rebellion. Some scholars figure that this wasn't his actual name, but the moniker he was given because of his rebellion. There is debate on who exactly Nimrod was, much debate, because historically there's yet to be found any mention of him on anything. Now, that doesn't mean something doesn't exist that we just haven't discovered yet, right? You can't assume just because we haven't discovered something that mentions Nimrod that he doesn't exist. There's a lot of things in the Bible that were thought to not exist because we had no record of it. And then record is discovered and it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, here we go. Like the Hittite Empire. It was thought for many years that the whole idea of Hittites was a myth and the Bible was inaccurate. And then lo and behold, I can't remember exactly who it was. Some man going through some, wastelands in Turkey and found this mound and this big place and a palace. And lo and behold, it was the seat of the Hittite Empire. There we go. The Bible proven right yet again. And this is the thing. I want to point this out. The Bible, this is for maybe you're a new believer. Maybe there's a young believer out there. This happened to me. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, especially questions in honesty. You can go before God and you can ask him any question you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes people feel like they can't ask questions and they feel like if they don't get answers right away, then that means that either the Bible's wrong or their trust was misplaced. You don't always get an answer right away. But one thing I want you to nail down is the Bible has been proven accurate time and time and time and time again. Every time somebody says, well, the Bible mentions this and we don't find that recorded anywhere in history, then lo and behold, oh, yeah, well, this person did exist. Like, if I'm not mistaken, it was thought for many years that Ramses didn't exist. And then lo and behold, there was an inscription found with Ramses. And for the longest time, there were many people that thought, oh, yeah, the Bible's not accurate. It talks about this Egyptian Pharaoh, King Ramses, and we don't find any record or any mention of him anywhere. And then lo and behold, they found record and mention of Ramses. So then they had to backtrack off that. So I want you to know you can trust the Bible. All right. It is a matter of faith, but it's not a matter of faith without reason and any evidence. Now, I also caution you with this. Almost nothing in life, I'm not going to say nothing because I'm not all knowing. Almost nothing in life is 100% provable without any question whatsoever. You could literally question whether George Washington was an actual person. You can question whether there was an actual revolution in the United States, right? You can question these things. Now, we have archaeological evidence and written and oral evidence of these things, but you could argue against all of that evidence. You legitimately could, and have some legit arguments. And I say that because I think sometimes people who question the Bible, what they're looking for is pretty much God to come out of heaven in a loud, thunderous voice and tell them, yes, this is true. You can believe it. I'm telling you this right now. And I'm not saying that can't happen, but I'm saying if that doesn't happen, that doesn't disprove the Bible. Anyway, now I'm going to get into my history mind, because this is where my history mind took off. Now, look at what it says about Nimrod, right? It says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, this is not a small thing, right? Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, remember, you believe the Bible. Moses is pinning these things down. So stories of Nimrod spread even to this point. And Nimrod was quite a ways before this book, right? So the fame of Nimrod had spread. It orally translated from his time all the way from Noah, Ham, Nimrod, who's the great grandson of Noah. And that story spread, his account spread all the way to the time of Moses, right? He's saying, even as, wherefore it is said, right? So this is a saying, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So the reason I say that is accounts and stories traveled orally. We see that now. That's confirmed right here. This is a actual account, and it was an oral story that was translated over time from mouth to mouth, ear to ear. Now, you also got to remember, you're playing a game of telephone across time. This is not even across a couple people. And I'm sure we all know about the game of telephone. You say something to someone, they say something to someone else, and they say something to the next person. And by the time that thing gets to its end point, it's not even the same story. It's not even remotely close to what it was. All right. Again, like I said, this is where it gets interesting. So I'm going to read some historical things now. Because there's a lot of people who move to discredit the Bible, and how they move to discredit the Bible is it wasn't Hebrew inscriptions, and writing wasn't the first writings, right? So the assumption is if you're the first person to write down the story, then you're the originator. I'm here to tell you that is false. Now, why did I say that about Nimrod? Why did I mention God again drops nuggets? This was, like I said, I get giddy about stuff like this. I don't know if you could tell. Like it was hard for me to make this video because I didn't even know where to go. My brain was going everywhere. Oral traditions spread. We have that evidence right there in the book of Genesis. Even as it is said, Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Here's what I ask you. Do you believe that Ham did not tell Cush about the flood And do you believe that Cush didn't tell his kids about the flood? And do you believe that Nimrod didn't tell all of the people who followed him because he was a mighty man? You think he didn't tell them these stories? Now, is it possible that Nimrod embellished, added some things, and made himself the central figure? Now remember, Nimrod, this is the seat of the world, all of the places that he founded, right, around him. It says that he was the beginning of the kingdom. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. This is all Mesopotamia. And out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh. Right? This is the seat of the Assyrian Empire. There was something that was discovered at Nineveh, and this is why this is going to matter. Again, remember, there's people who believe if you were the first to write something down, that means you were the originator of the story, and that is just not true. Being the first to write something down doesn't mean you're the originator of that story, or even the story that you're telling is true. So I'm going to read a little bit of things, right? Now, the only reason I'm reading this is because there's debate on who Nimrod is. There's really people can't find any mention of him throughout any historical documents. And that's why there's many scholars who surmise it's possible that Nimrod wasn't his actual name, or it may be transliterated wrong, right? Which that's always possible as well. Needless to say, there's some theories out there. All right, so I'm reading from this website, sacredtext.com. And this is about the legend of Izdubar, who they attribute to possibly being Nimrod. All right, these legends, which I discovered in 1872, are principally of interest from their containing the Chaldean account of the deluge. That's a flood. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna get you the dictionary definition, so I'm not just telling you things. You know how I do. So deluge, an overflowing of water, an inundation, a flood, a swell of water over the natural banks of rivers or shore of the ocean, spreading over the adjacent land. Okay, so count of the deluge. I have published the most perfect portions in various forms, since the most complete account being in my Assyrian discoveries. These legends have also been commented upon by M. Laramont in his Les Primeres Civilizations, and by Mr. Fox Talbot in the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. The Izdubar legend give, I believe, the history of the biblical hero Nimrod. They record the adventures of a famous sovereign of Babylonia, whom I provisionally call Izdubar, but whose name cannot at present be phonetically rendered. He appears to me to be the monarch who bears the closest resemblance in his fame and actions to the Nimrod of the Bible. Now, and a reason that matters is because I'm going to say a lot of people don't realize that there's certain things that don't phonetically transfer, and a lot of scholars don't necessarily know how to phonetically transfer certain words, right? So what if Nimrod not really being his name, and they couldn't phonetically transfer it, but they just said, okay, we're going to give him this name that represents valiance and rebellion because that surmises who he is, which is a huge possibility, which would be, again, another possibility why we never find historically a mention of Nimrod, because maybe whatever his name actually was just didn't phonetically transfer into our language. That's getting into Linguistics and transliterations, that's a whole nother story. No, that does not mean you can't trust your Bible. That would get into a deeper study. And I kind of wish I had done some of these things when I just got saved. But, I'm a new Christian. What do I know about any of this stuff? It would have been over my head anyway. Probably more than I could have handled. Okay. Since the first discovery of his history, very little light has been thrown on the age and exploits of Izdubar. Among all the references and allusions, there is nothing exact or satisfactory to fix his place in the scheme of Babylonian history. The age of the legends of Izdubar in their present form is unknown but may fairly be placed about BC 2000, as these stories were traditions in the country before they were committed to writing. Their antiquity and traditions are probably much greater than that. So again, oral transitions before people started writing. That's kind of why I wanted to read that. Okay, so that's a video I was watching. So there are stories, and I didn't know this. Excuse me, I'm closing all these videos. Like I said, I was looking up a whole bunch of stuff. There is stories of other ancient figures being swallowed by whales. Now, I watched some videos, looked up some things, and there's some people that say, oh, Hercules was said to have been swallowed by a whale for 3 days, and in one place is a dog. So they surmised that the book of Jonah was ripped from the story of Hercules. Now remember, this is all Greek gods. Jonah happened well before the rise of the Greek Empire. Another thing is, we assume that we have dates and times so 100% accurate. Now, to some degree, we know the approximate time of certain kings of certain ages because of different things that have been discovered archaeologically. But our assumption that we know exactly when something came about, right? When exactly was this story of Hercules being swallowed by a fish or a dog or whatever it was? And there's different stories like that. Here's the funny thing, and remember I told you this, these mariners would have seen what happened to Jonah when they threw him into the sea. They saw, it's my assumption, right? Bible doesn't necessarily say that they saw this great fish swallow Jonah, but I believe they did. I believe when they threw him in, and remember, everything subsided immediately. And we're gonna, I didn't get to those verses yet because I'm all these building blocks and historical things, but that news would have spread. It would not have stayed there. These men worshiped the most high God of heaven and earth. They made sacrifices to God. They professed their faith in the God that Jonah served. Rebelliously, but he served. That story spread. And again, like I said, as oral traditions transfer from person to person to person, stories change. People attribute things to other people. People take, a part of this story and a part of this story, and I'm going to mix this with that, and they embellish because they're not eyewitnesses. And I think a lot of that happened. And I also think a lot of that happened with Nimrod, and I'm going to get to that. The Epic of Gilgamesh. If you don't know much about the Epic of Gilgamesh, you can go look it up, but I'm going to do some reading, read a little bit of things about it, and all of these things matter, trust me. The oldest epic tale in the world was written 1,500 years before Homer wrote the Iliad. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells the Sumerian Gilgamesh, the hero king of Uruk, and his adventures. The epic story was discovered in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal and none other than Nineveh. Now, I've said this before. I believe one of the reasons that the people of Nineveh repented is it was a high probability that they had captors from Israel, slaves and people they captured that were in Nineveh. And there's, in my mind, like I said, this is all me historically guesstimating. So none of this is fact. I don't want you to take any of this as fact. It's just taking a lot of circumstantial evidence and historically guesstimating. My guesstimation is these Hebrews who were among the Ninevites, they worship, right? They worship God, especially after the judgment. You know, they ready after we're judged, after sin and we mess up, we ready to get down and worship at that point. And I don't think they're any different, right? So I'm sure that people of the city of Nineveh asked them about this God they worship, right? The Assyrian people were as wicked and as brutal as they were. They were fairly religious people, right? They worshipped, they were pagans. They worshipped idols, but they were fairly religious. So this is another God they don't know about. They probably asked questions. I believe they did. Now you got to remember, you also have to remember all of these places were started by Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Because people said, as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So his story was transitioning orally from person to person. It was transitioning. This is why the Epic of Gilgamesh matters. When you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh and you look at how these stories are told, it sounds a lot like they're talking about this figure, Nimrod. Why? Because Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Why would they call him a mighty hunter? Well, he probably hunted beasts that most people couldn't hunt down and kill. And he probably had a very charismatic, conquering spirit about him. And his stories and his tales were more than likely embellished as they were told from person to person. So when I see the things mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and here's the thing, Gilgamesh mentions certain things, and because this is one of the oldest writings, right, before the Bible was penned, the first thing that the Bible critics say is, see, the Bible got its stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh. I say nay. I say Nimrod, who got his stories from his father Cush, who got his stories from his father Ham, who was there on the ark and saw everything go down. They told these stories from generation to generation and they transferred orally. And as they transferred orally, when people begin to write, they begin to write these stories down with embellishments because we're playing a game of historical telephone. So just because this stuff was written first does not mean that this was the actual, that this is actually what happened, right? Just because the Bible was written after this doesn't mean that this was right. The Bible tells the true account as dictated by God, and the account we have in Gilgamesh is account that's a story that's been told and retold and retold and retold. They even talk about what they found in the library of Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king. That story had been rewritten a countless number of times. So again, transferring from place to place, from person to person, going from oral to written, yeah, that story more than likely changed. And this is where you also get to the Anunaki. All of these things matter to the book of Jonah, because why did God send Jonah to Nineveh? And I believe it was several reasons. Okay, so I'm going to read to you a little bit about the Anunaki and what people believe about it. Okay, according to the translations, let me start at the beginning. The history of the Anunaki, the 14 tablets of Enki. It is believed that around 444,000 years ago, ancient astronauts from another planet in the cosmos came to Earth in search of gold. And the 14 tablets of Enki, one of the ancient Anunnaki gods, the history of the Anunnaki is explained in great detail. The tablets also offer insight into the origin of life and how civilizations came into existence on Earth. These ancient astronauts touched down in one of Earth's seas and established Eridu, home in the fairway. According to the translations of author and researcher Zachariah Sitchin, the initial exploratory mission on Earth expanded into a full-fledged mission where they so-called Anunnaki established operative centers on Earth, the Moon, and even Mars. Eventually, the Anunnaki were short on manpower, so they employed genetic engineering to fashion primitive workers, aka Homo sapiens. Genesis 1:26, and God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish in the sea." Don't let me lose you here, because I'm getting somewhere with this. Today, when we speak about the Anunnaki, a lot of skepticism is present, and many reject the notion that ancient spacefaring astronauts called the Anunnaki touched down on the Earth thousands of years ago before written history. However, numerous scholars and theologians have begun to recognize that the biblical tales of creation, Adam and Eve, the garden, the deluge, the Tower of Babel, are in fact a product of ancient texts written down millennia before in ancient Mesopotamia by ancient Sumerians. Now, why did I go into all of that? I honestly believe, this is what I honestly believe. You can believe in the Anunnaki. I'm not going to criticize you for believing that. I believe you're wrong, but I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to come down on you in like judgment and fall down on your head because you believe in Anunnaki. You believe I'm wrong. I believe the Bible is correct. We're allowed to have that difference. This is what I will submit to you. Making the argument that because these documents were written first, that they're correct, is actually a false argument. If you tell me a story and I write that story down before you do, is my story correct? What if I get something wrong? What if I get a detail wrong? Is my story still correct? No, you are the originator of the story. So just because I wrote it first doesn't mean that I'm correct. If I write a book about you and about your life and tell stories and embellish and add some things and it's not 100% correct, and then you come behind me and like, nah, let me set the record straight, I'm gonna write a book. Would it make any sense for people to then come behind and say, well, nah, Brook Nam's book is correct because he wrote it first? No, nobody would go with that. That is the same argument that you're making when you say all of these tales of the Anunnaki and all these tablets and all these things, they're the true story because they were written first. Nah, homie. Just because they were written first, that's not de facto evidence that they are the correct story. That's just not the case. When you look at what the Bible says, when you look at Nimrod, when you look at how the oral story of Nimrod spread, the mighty hunter before the Lord, great grandson of Noah, no doubt the story of the flood, the story of what was going on before the flood, the story of Adam and Eve, the garden creation, no doubt those stories were told to Nimrod. And no doubt Nimrod, being who he was, mighty hunter before the Lord, like I said, the certain things are mentioned and they don't miss me. There's no doubt in my mind that Nimrod probably spread these stories and added some embellishment and made himself the central figure. So when you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, it really does sound like a story loosely based on actual creation accounts where somebody made themselves the central figure. Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. This is you could say, well, really is the father of that Mesopotamian civilization. The Assyrians, the Hittites, the Syrians, the Canaanites. Well, not the Canaanites, but you get what I'm saying. All right, just that whole region. He is the central figure that started all of that, right? Centralized power that all started with Nimrod. So is it beyond the realm of possibility that Nimrod heard these stories from his father, who heard the stories from his father, who was literally there, and as the stories were translated, they lost some details, and then Nimrod added some things? And then the fact that the Epic of Gilgamesh was found in the library in Nineveh, the library of Ashurbanipal. Nineveh, the same place that God sent Jonah to preach, and these people repented. See, this is what I think. I think that many people throughout the Assyrian Empire had a loose understanding of creation with some embellishments, a loose understanding of the great God of heaven and earth. I believe there were Hebrews there that were captive. As they worship God, people probably asked questions. They were probably talking and conversing. These Hebrew people were telling them what the Bible taught. It's hugely possible, in my opinion, this is my opinion, and even likely that as these people put together what the Hebrew people were saying and the stories that they were hearing about the Epic of Gilgamesh and all of these other characters, that they begin to say, wait a minute, I think that our story was missing some details and adding some stuff. And what these Hebrew people are talking about, yeah, that's the real story. So when Jonah came to preach to them and tell them, to tell them to repent, they were like, yo, we bow. We ain't playing with this great God of heaven and earth. We heard the stories. We know what it is. That's what I think happened. My personal opinion, of course, I wasn't there. I wasn't born, 4,000 years ago when all this, 4,000, 3,000 years ago when all this stuff happened. But looking at all of the evidence, all of the circumstantial evidence, I want to encourage all the Bible believers, and I want to encourage young Bible believers, don't be tricked off your square. Don't let somebody make a cunning argument without thinking this thing fully through, because people can be cunning and crafty. And what they say can sound true and it can sound accurate when there's actually a counter argument. You have a legitimate counter argument to all of these things. Do not get tricked off of your square. Believe that Bible. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.